Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, have no worries. I'm Natasha Kirchak, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
Our top story tonight, United States forces are on high alert in Baghdad as tens of thousands mourn across the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iranian Ayatollah Khamenei is seen weeping as he prays over the remains of his second-in-command and friend, Qasem Soleimani. General Soleimani was killed in a drone strike in Iraq, ordered by U.S. President Donald Trump, and Khamenei has now declared 3 days of mourning over the bitter loss, which so far has included massive crowds throughout Tehran and Soleimani's hometown of Kerman, where people chanted death to America and, of course, death to Israel. But Khamenei and top Iranian brass are also vowing harsh retaliation. As Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif puts it, Iranian authorities view Soleimani's death as a terrorist assassination against a hero and in utter contempt for UN charters while encouraging terror. While the White House is preparing, sending thousands of additional troops to the region, and now denying Foreign Minister Zarif entry to the U.S. too. Zarif is expected Thursday for a meeting at the UN headquarters in New York, but a U.S. official has confirmed that Zarif's visa has been rejected, barring him from entering the country. And as for Israel, security cabinet ministers have convened in Jerusalem and have determined that as Israel was not involved in the killing, the chances for retaliation against Israel is fairly low. Israeli and Jewish installations around the world, however, are still on high alert, and the U.S. Embassy in Israel has also released a travel advisory warning of sudden rocket attack. The world is on high alert following the United States' killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani over the weekend.
Last night, at my direction, the United States military executed a flawless strike that terminated the terrorist ringleader responsible for gravely wounding and murdering thousands and thousands of people and hundreds at least of Americans. Qasem Soleimani has been killed, and his bloody rampage is now forever gone.
While World War III is now trending on social media as Iranian officials are threatening retribution. Ayatollah Khamenei is promising harsh revenge to crowds who preach death to America and to Israel in Tehran. And pro-Iran groups, including Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, have also vowed action. Hundreds of Gazans additionally trampled on American and Israeli flags in a mourning tent set up for Soleimani. Israel and the U.S. are preparing for retribution, though. Jerusalem has warned Gaza through Egypt not to respond with any aggression, and the Security Cabinet is set to meet Sunday to discuss preparations in the north after Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed support for Washington's strikes.
Just as Israel has the right of self-defense, the United States has exactly the same right. Qasem Soleimani is responsible for the death of American citizens and many other innocent people. He was planning more such attacks.
Meanwhile, American forces have mobilized both from Kuwait and from the mainland, expecting retaliation from Iran and its proxies within weeks at the maximum. Qasem Soleimani has served as Iran's head of military and clandestine operations as the head of the IRGC Quds force for years, and he's thought of by many as the second-in-command to Ayatollah Khamenei himself. He was killed Friday in a United States drone strike just outside of Baghdad airport. Potential fears may be coming to fruition now as conflict to the north between the United States and Iran takes off.
Incoming!
Sirens are sounding across the heavily fortified green zone in Baghdad, Iraq, as 3 rockets land nearby the United States Embassy and Iraqi government building. Some injuries to civilians have been reported in the Iran-backed Hezbollah attack. This comes practically right on cue, though, as this is the 14th such rocket attack against U.S. installations in Iraq in the past 8 weeks. And it comes amidst warnings of reprisals from Iran and Iranian proxies like Hezbollah over the killing of Quds Force commander General Qasem Soleimani. A video threatening U.S. casualties and featuring the hashtag #HardRevenge is even circulating online in pro-Iran circles of social media, while mourners chant death to the U.S. and death to Israel. U.S. President Donald Trump, on the other hand, is doubling down, threatening to impose sanctions like never before and to even potentially target Iranian cultural sites, which his administration has warned would constitute war crimes. Meanwhile, Iran has replaced Soleimani with the appointment of Esmail Gana, who is vowing to avenge his predecessor. And speaking to Iranian state TV, he says Haifa and Tel Aviv in Israel may be the next targets. Well, Israel is taking very seriously Iran's threats against the state, and the Security Cabinet has been discussing possible consequences of Soleimani's assassination, in particular those from Iranian proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has been advocating for the retaliation against U.S. posts and their allies like Israel too. But still, support overall from Israeli officials regarding the killing of Soleimani has been positive, and Netanyahu has been reiterating the support since the drone strike occurred.
קאסם סולימאני הביא למותם של אזרחים אמריקנים רבים וחפים מפשע רבים נוספים במהלך עשרות השנים האחרונות, וגם בימים אלה סולימאני יזם, תכנן וביצע פיגועי טרור רבים ברחבי המזרח התיכון וגם מעבר לו. הנשיא טראמפ ראוי לכל הערכה על שפעל בנחישות, בעוצמה ובמהירות. אני רוצה להבהיר שוב שישראל עומדת לחלוטין לצידה של ארצות הברית למאבקה הצודק לביטחון, לשלום ולהגנה עצמית.
Okay, it is snowing in Israel. That is right. Israel's Mount Hermon ski resort has been blanketed with the white stuff following an intense wave of cold weather throughout the country, and tourists are loving it. Mount Hermon straddles the borders of Syria and Lebanon. It was actually closed over the weekend because of security concerns after the targeted killing of Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani, but now it is back up and running, and tens of people are hitting the slopes. The Hermon boasts 45 kilometers of ski routes on 11 paths and is the largest mountain in Israel, topping out at 2,200 meters. Snowboarders and skiers are taking advantage of the snowy mountain resort, of course, and now even the IDF's Alpine unit, which specializes in fighting in snowbound conditions, is making an appearance. All right. Now, the Israeli military has just released a report revealing that 2019 was the most violent year for Israel since the last Gaza war. In 2019 alone, there were almost 1,300 documented rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip, the highest number of rockets launched at Israeli communities since 2014. About 730 of them landed in open areas, and another 480 were shot down by the Iron Dome defense system, which means that 85% of all rockets launched at Israeli territory didn't cause death. Now, despite the rise in rocket launches, acts of Palestinian terrorism are apparently on the decline. 2 IDF soldiers were killed in 2019 by terrorist activity, and another 11 were wounded. Molotov cocktail attacks also decreased threefold to just 290 incidents. Only 19 shooting incidents were documented, and the number of Palestinians arrested in the West Bank also declined by 30%. Now, turning to the north, the IDF says it carried out 54 attacks on targets on the Syrian front throughout 2019. The Israeli Air Force has also recorded one of its busiest years, with over 1,800 combat deployments, over 600 operational helicopter deployments, and over 900 transport missions. The Israeli Air Force evacuated almost 160 people wounded in 213 rescue missions, most of which were civilians. In other news, world Jewish sites are bracing for impact as anti-Semitic attacks are expected to increase. Chabad missions worldwide are now on high alert in the wake of the death of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. The Chabad Lubavitch Security Commission is warning of potential retaliation against its centers, saying Soleimani's death will likely spark conflict either directly or indirectly. Though there's no information at this time to suggest that Chabad is specifically at risk. Meanwhile, in New York, following weeks of brutal and deadly anti-Semitic attacks, around 200 synagogues are showing interest in a special new device. The shul phones, offered by the volunteer Jewish neighborhood patrol group Shomrim, are small and instantly connect to emergency services like 911, United Hatzalah ambulances, or the Shomrim themselves.
Other small groups are also learning how to use firearms as a last resort measure, but former NBA All-Star Amari Stoudemire, on the other hand, is calling for peace and love, as well as for an anti-Semitism.
That's a tough story to
Very
cover.
tough story.
But moving on, the Israeli cabinet is shaking up as the prime minister appoints new leadership. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has now officially named his replacements for his 3 remaining ministry portfolios that he's been forced to resign from following indictments of criminal charges. Netanyahu was minister of 5 different posts in addition to being prime minister until as late as the summer of 2019. But he's been slowly giving them up, starting with giving the foreign ministry to Israel Katz, and then promoting Deputy Health Minister Yaakov Litzman to full Minister of Health. And now he's named Likud loyalists David Bitan and Tzipi Otoveli, as well as Shas MK Yitzhak Cohen to be Agriculture Minister, Minister of Diaspora Affairs, and Housing Minister, respectively. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu's requested immunity may be already at risk, as rival party Blue and White is pushing for quicker deliberations. The faction headed by Benny Gantz says that it has presented Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein with letters representing at least 65 MKs, all in support of immediately establishing a committee to rule on the Prime Minister's immunity from trial while in office. And that's not all. In a further bid to pull voters away from the right and from the Likud, Blue and White has now decided to shift its policies rightward. According to Israeli media, the Blue and White faction will no longer consider forming a government that includes the support of the Joint Arab List, while keeping on the table possible Jordan Valley annexations, all in response to new voter research.
Okay, so we're going to move on to something that is hopefully a little bit more uplifting. Yet another Israeli startup has made a massive exit, and get this, it's the biggest Israeli deal ever to be made in the cybersecurity field.
Yep, this time around it is the Israeli-founded security platform Armis, which is set to be acquired for around $1 billion with a B by the New York company Insight Partners.
Armis was founded in 2015, and its solution eliminates security blind spots in the Internet of Things.
The Internet of Things, or IoT, is all about connecting and networking devices that haven't necessarily been connected before, whether it's connecting your fridge to an app or on your phone, or your car to a security system. But doing so creates a new entry point to our devices that poses an increased risk for security and privacy.
Armis allows companies to fully embrace the Internet of Things, or the IoT, by giving them full visibility and control over the devices that operate within their networks, all by analyzing and classifying these devices in order to identify risks or potential cyber attacks. And Armis has already successfully alerted tech giants like Google and Amazon of potential cyber breaches in their smart speaker products. The Israeli company actually uncovered an exploit over Bluetooth that would have allowed hackers to take over devices and spread malware, affecting over 20 million users.
Well, Google has since invested several $1 million into Armis, so it's no surprise that the company is now being acquired in such a massive deal.
Well, to begin today, heavy storms across Israel are causing even more flooding throughout the country, and some of the videos that are coming out are just shocking, honestly. 6 people have already died in weather-related incidents over the past few weeks, including a young couple here in Tel Aviv. And now yet another person has been killed today, a 32-year-old man who was trying to save a father and son during a massive flood in Nahariya. Now, emergency services have been scrambling to rescue people trapped in cars on waterlogged roads in the north, more specifically, and 15 kids were actually even rescued from a flooded kindergarten. So stay safe in this crazy weather. You will not be biking home today.
No, unfortunately, I won't be. But moving on now, crisis in Iran and Iraq this morning as back-to-back incidents rock the Middle East. World powers are urging for calm today following an overnight Iranian rocket barrage targeting 2 United States Army bases in Iraq. Over 20 ballistic missiles had been launched at the 2 bases, which house American troops. And the attack comes after officials in Tehran promised revenge for the United States.
Live in Israel. That's the debate that's re-erupting in Israel after the Sephardic chief rabbi cast his doubts over whether the Soviet Israeli community is Jewish enough to live in the Holy Land. Yitzhak Yosef has repeated calls to amend the law of return, which allows people of Jewish ancestry to gain citizenship in Israel. He says that only people who have Jewish maternal lineage should be able to come to the Holy Land, not just anybody who has a Jewish grandparent. And he's pointing his finger at part of Israel's Soviet community, which he claims falls into this category.
ישנה עוד עלייה נוספת, בואו נתכחש לכך, עלייה של אותם שאינם יהודים, כאלו שלא יהודים ואפילו מפתחים רגשי אנטישמיות כלפי היהדות.
Back in the 1990s, hundreds of thousands of Soviet Jews emigrated to Israel following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Today there are close to an estimated 2 million Israelis of Russian descent. And Knesset members across the political spectrum are urging the Attorney General to immediately investigate the chief rabbi over incitement against Jewish immigrants from former Soviet nations. Prime Minister Netanyahu is similarly blasting the rabbi's comments as outrageous and inappropriate, adding that the community is a boon to the country and to the whole of the Jewish nation.
Now, it's been 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp in Poland, and Israel is marking the date with an event in Jerusalem, but Polish President Andrzej Duda is now boycotting the ceremonies.
Before its liberation in January of 1945, over 1 million people, mostly European Jews, were exterminated by the hands of the Nazis at the Auschwitz camp in Poland.
But the Polish president says that he will not be attending the January 23 anniversary event in Israel because he was not invited to speak, while Russian President Putin and select other European leaders, on the other hand, will get the chance.
In fact, Polish President Duda has indicated that he must be allowed to present true facts about the start of World War II in the face of what he alleges are recent lies, particularly from Putin, who states that, yes, essentially Poland colluded with Hitler, as is clear from archival documents.
And while it's true that many Poles were complicit with the Nazis' genocidal regime, it's also true that Poland was also the first country invaded and occupied by Nazi Germany. So in an attempt of sorts to rebrand, Poland has been working to rewrite its level of involvement in the Holocaust.
Although President Duda will not be in Jerusalem for Israel's event, he will attend the anniversary ceremony in Auschwitz on January 27th, and the camp will also continue to teach millions about it. Well, to begin today, heavy storms across Israel are causing even more flooding throughout the country, and some of the videos that are coming out are just shocking, honestly. 6 people have already died in weather-related incidents over the past few weeks, including a young couple here in Tel Aviv. And now yet another person has been killed today, a 32-year-old man who was trying to save a father and son during a massive flood in Nahariya. Now, emergency services have been scrambling to rescue people trapped in cars on waterlogged roads in the north, more specifically, and 15 kids were actually even rescued from a flooded kindergarten. So stay safe in this crazy weather. You will not be biking home today.
No, unfortunately, I won't be.
All right, now in other news, Israeli political leaders are now calling for investigations into the top religious authorities as Chief Rabbi Yosef doubles down on his assertions that many Israelis from the former Soviet Union just aren't Jews.
Do you have the right to live in Israel? That's the debate that's re-erupting in Israel after the Sephardic chief rabbi cast his doubts over whether the Soviet Israeli community is Jewish enough to live in the Holy Land. Yitzhak Yosef has repeated calls to amend the law of return, which allows people of Jewish ancestry to gain citizenship in Israel. He says that only people who have Jewish maternal lineage should be able to come to the Holy Land, not just anybody who has a Jewish grandparent. And he's pointing his finger at part of Israel's Soviet community, which he claims falls into this category.
ישנה עוד עלייה נוספת, בואו נתכחש לכך, עלייה של אותם שאינם יהודים, כאלו שלא יהודים ואפילו מפתחים רגשי אנטישמיות כלפי היהדות.
Back in the 1990s, hundreds of thousands of Soviet Jews emigrated to Israel following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Today there are close to an estimated 2 million Israelis of Russian descent. And Knesset members across the political spectrum are urging the Attorney General to immediately investigate the chief rabbi over incitement against Jewish immigrants from former Soviet nations. Prime Minister Netanyahu is similarly blasting the rabbi's comments as outrageous and inappropriate, adding that the Russian Israeli community is a boon to the country and to the whole of the Jewish nation.
Meanwhile, even though Israel and the United States are the first on the Iranian regime's list, other American allies in the region, especially in the Gulf, are also bracing for conflict.
Western foreign embassies in Baghdad are effectively on lockdown, and European ambassadors at the EU are pleading for de-escalation in the wake of IRGC Commander Qasem Soleimani's killing.
The Secretary General has consistently advocated for de-escalation in the Gulf. He is deeply concerned with the recent escalation. This is a moment in which leaders must exercise maximum restraint. The world cannot afford another war in the Gulf.
Response from Iran is practically assumed either way, though, leading to heavy fortification across the world. In the U.S., park police are stepping up patrols at major landmarks in metropolitan areas. German security services are similarly reporting revised guidance on how to appropriately respond to threats against American and Jewish facilities. And 2 major Arab airlines have canceled all flights with Iraq. Not everyone is mourning and preparing for the worst, though. Some, many even in the Arab world and Iran, are celebrating the death of Soleimani as a service in the war against Iran's expansion.
طبعا نحن يعني نهنئ كل الشعب السوري والشعب العراقي الشعب السني طبعا بمقتل قاسم سليماني ذلك المجرم الذي تمادى في قتل أطفال سوريا وأطفال العراق وسعى في تشريد أهل السنة والجماعة في سوريا والعراق، وهذه فرحة وجمعة مباركة لكل الشعبين السوري والعراقي.
Anyhow, a family in Haifa had the shock of a lifetime at the funeral of their grandmother. 86-year-old Anne Ben Bassat was about to be buried in a cemetery in Haifa, but just before relatives began to accompany her to her place of rest, they opened the casket to find a completely different person.
No, we are not kidding. Ben Bassat's body had been switched out with that of a foreign woman, and Ben Bassat had already been buried in the morning by a different family who had mistakenly identified
We're
him.
not quite sure how you mistake the body of a relative, but as you can imagine, Bassat's family was in hysterics.
Yeah, so they did what I guess anyone in this strange situation would do. They dug her out of where she had been buried and buried her again in the right place.
That's it for ILTV's weekly review. See you next week.